As my career progressed, I was increasingly drawn to the global patterns here. This is through journal publications, being invited to speak at international meetings in the United States. So the world scene is fascinating. How far will we advance in Australia? Will we be behind or ahead in understanding what causes our droughts and for drought preparedness? So I was particularly interested in how the global pattern fitted to the Australian pattern. Because they're so important, we have to know what our colleagues are doing. I was surprised after my first seminar that I gave in Geneva in 1996, how little the world was prepared for extreme weather and climate events. Very little preparedness, very little understanding of drought. Yet in Australia, we were particularly well prepared. So our leadership there became very apparent, that we had this capability to prepare for droughts and even the wet seasons far better than most of the rest of the world. I would say all of the rest of the world. So we have huge leadership through the breakthroughs we made in the late 1980s, early 1990s. So through that journey, I managed to set up a drought program within the United Nations, which didn't exist until that point. So the United Nations wasn't particularly interested in drought, or the World Meteorological Organization. Climate was almost on the back foot. So it's a matter of bringing our knowledge to bear to show the importance of this sort of work that has carried me through the United Nations. And running various management groups, and then being in charge of various management groups and setting the strategic direction in the United Nations for world food security work, for work on extreme droughts and extreme floods, and everything in between, has carried me forward now to being Vice President of a major part of the United Nations Commission in Geneva. And it's through our leadership, I think, that we developed in Australia that has carried me and others, my colleagues, into that position. So it's been a remarkable turnaround. As a colleague of mine once said, there's no one out there to tell us what to do. We are ahead of the rest of the world, so we have to draw on our own resources, our own understanding of just how this works to take us forward, because the rest of the world is now looking to us for leadership. Because it's so important. The world's climate is usually out of balance, completely out of balance. If it's too dry here in Eastern Australia, it's too wet in Eastern Africa and Europe, and vice versa. That's just a small example. If it's too wet here, they have massive droughts in Somalia and Kenya, and in Europe, the Danube dries up. Well, the world's usually way out of balance, but the world doesn't know that and doesn't know how to manage it. So how do you sit a global system into a management system to have this is just natural variability before we start talking climate change. So that's the challenge ahead. How do you make this work properly as a global scene? Because we're all interconnected, let alone for things such as trading patterns and food security and famine and global insecurity and wars and so on are often caused by underlying problems such as drought and food problems and so on and so forth. So it has enormous implications globally. That's a wonderful challenge.